coming on. I mean, we just tend to just start, you know. But this
You're
has been
taller than I expected.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So somebody said that to me the other day as well. Somebody came in to do a podcast and went, Rebel City, and I was like, yeah, and they were like, you're taller than exactly that. You're taller than what I thought you were going to be.
Anybody that's seen us will have almost certainly only ever seen us sitting down.
I'll lower my seat to make Matt feel good about himself, you know.
No, it's going to take a fucking hell of a lot more than that, to be honest with you.
But I mean, yeah, it took us a couple of attempts, but we got here. We got here eventually. Do you like the studio?
It's amazing. Like, I love it.
Dig you fishing for compliments, man.
I'm loving the microphones, the Shure and the Pod mic. You can't go wrong with these. I'm a total tech geek, so I get. And my husband has told me to stop buying gear. So.
Tell him no.
I know. Well, I've just ordered something else. So
oh, superb. I mean, I literally on the daily go into Gumtree, search for Shure SM7B, go into Facebook Marketplace, search for Shure. Because if there's a bargain going, I mean, I don't need it, but I'm buying it. Like, I'm absolutely buying it.
To the point where he stopped telling me how much shit costs now. So I'm not quite in the same boat as your husband, but no far off that. Yeah. You did what, mate?
But I'm with you. Like, I had, so when we first started the podcast, it was all like, I just Googled it, you know, like, what would I need to do a podcast? And because I'd been in a band, I had it all sitting in a box in like my mum's house. And I had these like really sort of kind of cheap but really amazing mics that I'd got like in 2003 or 2004, like Samsung, no Samsung, but Samsung. And they sound way better than these Shures. But I'm not using them because I want to use the Shures, you know what I mean? So I'm a bit of a geek in that way where I like, I want the proper stuff, you know? But I think
standard.
Absolutely. But what was it that got you into podcasting? Because like me and Matt were talking.
I think I read, because obviously, you know, we always do a wee bit of research beforehand. I think your LinkedIn's got podcast at like 12 years and such now. I feel like we got into podcasting and like the Glasgow scene quite early, and we were like 2.5, maybe pushing 3, I think 3 years in August. So you've got like nearly a decade on us, according to, you know, the podcast bio. Like, you must have been a pretty fucking early adopter of this format.
I think we were one of the first, and there was a guy, Sean McCann, who I worked with for a telecommunications company, who shall remain nameless. And he was really great with tech, but there's been several people. There's a guy called K9 Kev who is from Oban. He was like a rapper, but I'd started writing about unsigned musicians. Unsigned is not really it doesn't apply anymore. Music's changed so much. But I loved, there were so many people that I really loved, and I just felt that there really wasn't enough of a platform for them. So I just thought, right, I'd heard about podcasting, and I just like saw little snippets. I think it was mostly from America, and they were really starting to kick off there. And then I was just like, right, fuck it, let's just try it. And then we just gained like a really good audience and stuff, and the press started picking up, and that's been it. And then it's just opened so many doors for me. So it's my career now.
Yeah. You're one of the lucky ones.
Yeah, very much so. And I really count myself lucky. But don't get me wrong, I have busted my arse. So I've worked like 100-hour weeks at times just to get stuff going. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you were saying there, the American podcast scene's almost like 15 years old or something like that. And one of the questions that I had, it's actually it's
way more evolved than where we are at the moment.
Down the list is, like, where do you see the UK, the Scottish podcasting scene sort of moving? Because the American scene seems so vastly different. I mean, it's wild. They've got some podcasters out there that are now like approaching tens of millions that they're making off of a podcast, which is sort of strange. But do you see the scene here going that same route, like being able to sort of pull that type of money and influence that they've got over there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different avenues at the moment that I've started to see is people on reality TV have started getting their podcasts. And I'm like, right, okay, that's fine. The true crime thing, I think the UK do phenomenally. I think they do that really well. And that's something that I'd kind of like to really see develop. I have to mention The Big Light, who is the network who I'm part
Yep.
of. And Janice and Fiona, who started the network, they are really trying to kind of put Scotland on the map. And I think they're probably one of the companies who are kind of really pushing things into that sphere of getting into those figures and making it really serious, but making sure that Scotland is represented. I mean, I was looking at the podcast nominations, the British Podcast Award nominations. I was really happy to see a couple of Scottish people on there. But at the same time, I see people who've come from radio, and I'm like, you've already got an established audience.
Yeah.
And I know so many people who are doing things way better than you, far more interesting, but they are not getting the same focus.
Yeah.
So it's a really bittersweet thing for me.
I think that's something that I've kind of become somewhat aware of, and sort of both the points you raised there, both about people with a mainstream sort of radio audience that they can rely on, as well as people with a level of profile, like you say, reality TV and so on and so forth. Like, especially during lockdown, it seemed to be that a lot of people sort of used that time and space to sort of try and kick off the podcast. I think we've commented on it before, where it'd be interesting to see how much of that maintains beyond the pandemic. You would assume that people with a solid sort of history in an industry like radio are going to be fairly well positioned to build on it in future. But I'd be quite interested to see how many of these personalities or celebrities maintain it when opportunities to go back on TV and these other things start to, reoccur. You know what I mean?
And it's the producers behind these podcasts, the ones that make the magic. Like, I guess that there's been the Battersea Poltergeist was one of the most recent kind of on like audio drama things. I'm really into that. Like the acting combined with the narration and the podcasting. And I think, you're looking at a podcast like that, it takes maybe about 3-4 years to make. So by the time you've made that, you've put it out and you're researching and all that, it's those people, I think, that are sometimes forgotten.
Definitely.
Which I guess it's just one to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that's kind of like where I'm trying to go, is that I'm starting to be like, I don't really know if I want to be in front of the mic that much, but I've really enjoyed the tech. So I'm getting into the tech, but Matt really enjoys the sort of narrative. So try to maybe think about something about creating narratives for people. And I think really, like, I hate to say it, but I'm kind of waiting for somebody famous or semi-famous or somebody with a platform that I could be like, mate, I'll just do this for you. You don't even need to think about what you're doing. Turn up. So I suppose I'm kind of playing into that. And as you were talking about that, I was kind of like, I don't really like that. You know what I mean? Like, why am I then looking at the scene the way it's evolved very recently, as Matt's saying, the pandemic, and it's became just radio, like Peter Crouch's podcast. That's the #1 podcast in the country. Peter Crouch is on Radio 5 Live every week. It's like, leave the space, like, come on. But then, I don't know, maybe that's just podcast elitism or something like that, or my low self-esteem coming in and going, I don't have the personality of Peter Crouch, he needs to back off so that I can have this space for myself,
But
I'm not rocking up to the Stoke Stadium in boots and shinnies being like, pure, he's a fucking game. You know what I mean?
But Scotland's still so far behind. So I think, if anything, it's very much about making a safe space for yourself and getting people to follow that. And I'm a firm believer in that. And I'm just like, look, if you don't like what I'm doing, that's fine, but I'm still just going to keep doing it. So
absolutely. And I think that's something that I've actually came to like love about podcasting is that I don't really care about what we talk about. It's like, well, see, if I want to speak to the person, I'm going to do it. And one of the big lessons that I've learned, and I think me and Matt have both went through this, and I suppose I could put the question to you how you've dealt with this personally, is like looking at the numbers. We've had guests where I'm like, this is going to bang. Like, we had one that springs to mind particularly, a guy called Ray Walford, who'd wrote a book about a woman called Kath Duncan, who was like a socialist that grew up in Dundee and was a personal friend of Winston Churchill's wife. And I was like, this is so interesting. Nobody knows Netflix are interested in the book. And I'm like, this is going to bang. 250 people listen to it, and you're like, what? Like,
but
how's
on the other
that?
side of things, we spoke to Cisco, and about prison recovery, and it broke almost every record that we've got. So you're like, there's no. I don't think going into when you're making them, an episode or a podcast, like I find it really difficult to anticipate, what the audience wants. So I think it's probably more important than ever that you do you and what you're interested in. You know what I mean? So I think the market, the next step for it, or in general, is more niche, because I think when you look at particularly in Scotland, there's a number of all good long form chat podcasts and stuff like that, but I'm kind of feeling, even though that's largely what we do, that it's a format that's kind of maybe getting a wee bit kind of stale, and we need to start looking at, I don't know, more niche stuff, because I think if you catch your right audience at the right time, that's where you're going to sort of build for. Did I read? If you get you're involved in a podcast for a woman of North African descent or something like that? Was it?
Well, my dad's Moroccan,
right?
But I was mentoring women from Arab and North Africa,
right?
So to do podcasts. So a number of them have gone on to do that. So that's been amazing. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not confident enough to kind of cover that side of stuff. Although being mixed race, that's something that I'm working on in the background.
Okay.
It's been a very, it's quite a hard space to be in, and it's very conflictive. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, like a couple of weeks back, and he's the same. He's mixed race, and he's just like, you're just pretty much, you're too much of, your side that's not the UK thinks that you're not foreign enough. Your UK side thinks you're not white enough. Your white side thinks you're not white enough. And then it's just kind of like, but then it's when people don't acknowledge your cultural heritage as well. And that really fucks me off, because I'm like, you're just totally trying to whitewash me. And that's not something but I've been very lucky in terms of the spaces and people who I've more recently over the last couple of years been integrating with. And Dardishi, which is a Arab and North African collective, and that's who I was mentoring. I was doing the podcast workshops through. And then obviously We Are Here Scotland, Jibemi is one of your previous guests, Aika, Brianna, and that's for people of colour, Black and ethnic minorities. So I guess it's really nice to find people that kind of maybe understand you a bit better sometimes. But I still have to recognise my own privilege, because I'm very much a light-skinned person. So it's so complicated.
Yeah, and I think this is actually one of the sort of things that I remember listening to somebody that was mixed race not so long ago, maybe like the past few years, and them telling their story about just exactly what you were saying. I'm not black enough for the black community, I'm not white enough for the white community. Where do I sit in all of this, and the narratives that are being sort of pushed in society? And I think it's an interesting one, because as culture has become more mixed, more mixed race people are just going to be born.
Totally.
And they need a voice. Like, they absolutely need a voice. Why was it important to you to actually mentor people of sort of African descent and get them into podcasting? Like, why was that important to you? So
I guess in terms of, I'm very passionate about that side of my culture, Arab and North African in particular, and it's not been until my later years. Don't get me wrong, when we first moved to Dunoon, towered by Dunoon, when I was like 8, and my dad was the only Arab in the village, and everyone was just like, what the fuck is this? Because my dad's very loud, and I there was racism and all that kind of stuff that came along with it, but I was almost like, I need to fit in here, I need to adapt to this, and so on. And then it's not been since the last kind of 15 years that I've kind of really embraced that side of me, and I've loved it. And I've got quite upset, because I was like, I'm so sad that I've dismissed a lot of that, and I don't feel, even though I'm very close with my Moroccan family and all that kind of stuff, but it's that whole thing, especially with women of colour, it's so difficult. Like, you've got the pecking order, and no offence, guys, but you're at the top.
Oh, we know. Don't worry. The amount of times that Matt will go, I'll suggest a subject and the Matt will go, we don't need 2 more white guys talking about this, you know, but
like once a week, easily.
Yeah.
so
Easy.
we're aware, you know,
Yeah.
like, and we know that we're very much privileged, definitely.
2 white guys talking to BLM activists and stuff like
Yeah.
that. We're aware that sometimes it might not look great, but our intentions are pure.
Totally. And I that's a really important point as well, is that it's about, you know, kind of bringing it into a stream of people that are on the same wavelength as you and your audience. But yeah, so I just wanted to kind of give back and recognize that privilege that I had in terms of the tech knowledge, the opportunities that I'd been given. But then again, if you go down, you've got Black women who are it's even harder for them. Then you're getting into the trans community. So it's like, yeah, so I guess I just want to try, and this is not being a fucking martyr or anything, even though you're going to get some dickhead on the internet that's like, oh, you know, but it's honestly just because I get such comfort, and it's a mental health thing as well. When you help people, it makes you feel better, you know?
Absolutely.
When you've done something, you're feeding into the next generation and paying it forward and all that jazz.
Yeah, and I think for somebody like yourself that's got like that sort of North African Arabic sort of history, and you've kind of made that conscious decision to try and fit into a more sort of like Western or like into the Scottish sort of culture, there will be maybe even subconsciously, there'll be a part of you that wants to honour that. You know, I can understand that sort of like calling to like really engage with that, because it's part of your heritage and it's who you are.
Totally.
You know, and it takes a lot of confidence to do that, especially in, you know, in Scotland. If you go back, like, I'm really enthusiastic about all of the people of colour that are now getting platforms and getting voices. And we were talking to Jabemi about how did he find the Glasgow music scene 3 years ago when he, or I don't even know, 2 years ago when he first moved to Glasgow. And
gone to club gigs for 15 years in Glasgow, and I probably count on one hand the amount of times, you know, I've seen a black rapper in Glasgow. You know what I mean? Like, even just, you know, that level of visibility or anything, it's just not been an inherent part of our culture because Scotland is so overwhelmingly white.
Yeah,
You know
and
what I mean?
it's
Like,
utterly horrendous that Scottish hip hop is so white, given that hip hop and grime and that culture is from Black people.
yeah,
So it boils my blood.
yeah.
But there you go.
Yeah, I mean, we went to a Sonny Govan thing 2 or 3 years ago, and it was hip hop based, and I don't think there was one white artist, and that's, I think, like, we had a bit of a laugh and a joke with Jabemi, who wants to see more white people rapping, and you know, it's good to see like a sort of black rapper get a platform and get boosted, but at the same time, you know, guys like
with all my might, just no stand and defend the Beastie Boys here right now.
Oh, no. They are phenomenal.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
yeah, but that's not a slight at white rappers.
Yeah.
No, not
like
at all.
people in Scotland that are wanting to do music of black origin or whatever. Like, it's just a case of going, like, it's good to finally hear and see. Like I'd said, that seeing a BBC introducing guy on BBC One Extra with an Aberdeen top, my jaw hit the floor. Like, not in like a bad way, and like a wow, I cannot believe that I'm actually hearing a Scottish accent in rap that's not making me cringe, for one. But two, there's
It's also no
black
centred in
guy,
Glasgow or Edinburgh.
and it's no Glasgow centric.
Yeah, totally.
And a black guy in an Aberdeen top, and just
Yeah.
like, this is so cool, because I feel like maybe even if that boy had been about in the past, he wouldn't have put the Aberdeen top on. He'd maybe have been like, nah, this isn't the cool thing to do. But he's actually like been like, I'm for Aberdeen, and it's like, it's strange and cool for me to see that, you know. And
Yeah.
I think more power to you if you're given, like you're saying, you've had many opportunities, and it's like, well, why would I not give that back to
Yeah.
the community? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
No, it's been good.
So in terms of the podcast itself, like, who have you got any like highlights of like bands you gave a wee bit of a spotlight to that then, you know, took off or anything like that?
Oh my God,
Any big
you're really
ones?
putting me on the spot here with Podcart. Oh my God. I don't really know. Do you know, that's really... Fontaine's DC.
Ah.
So that's a really good one, actually. So their publicist, we get hundreds of tracks sent to us each week. I mean, to the point that it's just like, it's so overwhelming. And I heard this song by like, I just thought, right, I'm going to actively sit down and listen to absolutely everything. And then this track came on, and I just stopped everything, picked up the phone to one of my friends, Sharon, and I was just like, I'm going to send you a song right now. You need to immediately listen to it. So
awesome.
She listened to it and she's like, oh my God. I was like, they're from Dublin. I'm going to find out. She's like, we need to put them on in Scotland. We need to do it. And I was like, I totally agree. So we then contacted the publicist and I said, can you give me the management details, put me in touch, and blah, blah, blah. And then that was it. And yeah, we put on their first ever Scottish show. And it was like, I have to say that, and that coming from a music site to be able to do that, and that was in Block. And obviously Block is, it's quite a strange place, Block. It's, you know, it's had its ups and downs, and it's been controversial at times. But see, in terms of a model for a music venue, so they pay the musicians. It was free entry. Obviously, this is pandemic now, but free entry, food, rider, the whole lot. And then so that gave us the opportunity to then bring them over, and they played and stuff. And yeah, I don't think people still talk about that now, and they still keep in contact. And obviously, their manager Trevor, who's an absolute diamond, I think he was so grateful. And I think they were just so overwhelmed by the hospitality as well, and the audience in Scotland, considering that no one knew who they were.
Yeah.
And then literally a couple of months later, and then now they've been nominated for a Grammy and shit like that.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely bonkers.
I mean, that's crazy. But I think that, like, when you're talking about there, like, music venues, I feel like that a lot of the sort of music scene in Glasgow, particularly like the big cities, they don't really lend themselves to like what you just described there, which is like a new artist that is going to go into big things, but you get them in at that level and you get to see them in Block. I mean, what does Block hold? 100 folk?
120, I think.
120 folk, you get to see them in that size of venue.
That'd have been a tidy gig.
When you get, definitely, but when you get that sort of venue and you get that sort of experience, like paying the band, which should absolutely happen, like one of the things that I hate with a passion's pay to play, I just can't go it. Like, we were talking to Jabemi about this, was like, for these guys to call themselves promoters is a joke. Like, they don't promote anything.
Nah.
They want you to be. They actually annex the promotion to you. Here, there's your tickets, go and promote it and sell it for me. It's like, it's so lazy. But I think it's the lack of passion that exists within that music scene, and to hear that it's took like a podcaster to bring a bit of passion to like a sort of music venue. It's so cool to hear, you know. So you should have done more of that. Like,
another example of that sort of ability to shine the light on things that maybe mainstream publications or organisations are not covering, because again they're involved in other things, but because you've got that wee sort of maybe passion project, whatever it is, that, you know, whether it be you, us, or anybody else for that matter, when they take that platform they've got and shine a light on a very good artist for the first time, it's maybe going to, as I say, be that exposure that they couldn't have got anywhere else, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and that's something I definitely like about the format. Like, in terms of, well, we'll move on to the podcast, because I'm not going to put you on the spot anyway.
No, it's fine.
Obviously the big one recently has been Sonic Hug that you've been doing in conjunction with Big Light.
Yeah.
The tagline I come across was that it's a sort of safe online and offline space for discussions about mental health. Now, we are actively talking about, I mean, I've talked about it like 3 times in the last week just because I'm in it, but at the same time, it's a really interesting, it was the offline element to it, because obviously we see the online element in your episodes and stuff like that, but I was intrigued to just ask, like, what does it mean by online and offline space?
So offline, what I'd done is I'd started a walking group in Queen's Park in Southside, again pre-pandemic, and that was one of the best things I've done in my whole life. Like, it just really, I had people coming, like sporadically coming. They would maybe pop in and out one Saturday or whatever. Some people would come every week. And just to be able just to walk around a park with someone and just maybe not necessarily talk about your mental health, but give them the opportunity to talk about how their week had been, what they were struggling with in a way that wasn't like, it's unconscious therapy, I guess.
Yeah. Walk and talks become quite a popular concept in a number of places in recent years.
Yeah, so that was amazing. And then I had said, I just put on the website over the pandemic that if people wanted to have one-to-ones with me just to chat, because obviously I'd gone through agoraphobia, PTSD, extreme anxiety, and so on. And I had so many people. So I was having these kind of telephone or online talks with people. And they still, some of them are my really good friends now. And
that's amazing.
Like, it's been really good.
Yeah.
Walking talk for an agoraphobic must have been quite a challenge. Was that something you deliberately picked, or was that just something that naturally happened?
Yeah. So walking's been the thing that has helped me probably more than anything. Agoraphobia for me was utterly horrendous. Have you guys either ever experienced
I had an
it?
aunt that was agoraphobic, and she was agoraphobic for like the first 15 or 16 years of my
Holy
life.
Shit.
And it stemmed from my uncle that I never met had bullied her.
Right.
And tried to like contain her in the house, like be that sort of traditional housewife. This is back in like the 70s, that this happened, and they split up. And I knew nothing but that she couldn't leave this house, Like, I didn't understand it. I was like a wee boy and just thinking, what's going on here? But as I've got older, I'm a cognitive behavioural therapist.
Yeah.
So I understand it now, and I get it. But when I was a wee boy, I was just like, what's going on here? Like, she can't leave the garden. It was like this mythical barrier at the gate where she couldn't cross this, or she would have a complete panic attack. Like,
I wouldn't say I've had any personal experience. I've had anxiety to the point where the notion that I'm stepping outside the house was laughable, but I wouldn't have said it was because the outside was the challenge. It was because I just wanted to hide inside.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, but I don't know if that's comparable in any way.
No, I think it definitely is. And it started when I worked for, going back to said telecommunications company.
Yeah.
And
for those that, me and Halina both worked for the same unnamed telecommunications company and both had an absolute horrendous time.
it was utterly horrendous. And they really did not understand, and I think you can attest to this as well, was how to handle mental health, what we were going through, certainly what I was going through. They literally, and I felt I was almost punished because of it. But I was so terrified of not going to work, getting fired, not having an income, that it got to the point that I was just debilitated and I just couldn't leave the house. It started for me on public transport. I had a massive panic attack on the train, and I just didn't know. I'd had panic attacks, and I just thought, I don't really know what that is. And then this one, to the point I was actually banging on the train windows to get me off, and it was rush hour, and I was mortified. And I just, after that, I was like, I cannot go back. I can't get back on that. I don't know what to do. So I started paying £200 a month for taxis to get to and from work.
Yep.
And I was put on a final written warning. So that was almost like a death sentence in itself. And I was trying to explain to them, and I shouldn't have even been put on that final written warning. And I tried to take it as far as I could, but they all rallied against me.
And that was a common occurrence.
Yeah. And then then that was it. I had to just get through it. And I look back now and I go, how did I get through that? I cannot believe it. So walking, it was the only, I was fine for a few years. I'd kind of got myself a bit back to normal as you want to be. And then I had another wobble, and it was on a bus, and I was just absolutely like, where has this come from? I don't know where this has come from. And I was like, I was in a different job, but I was like, I need to get in. So I was like, fuck it, I'm going to start walking and see if I can do it. Because I wasn't physically very fit at that point. And it was Southside to city centre. And I mean, it's not too bad. It's about like half an hour, 40 minutes in. But yeah, it started doing that, and then that was it. It just opened up this whole like, holy shit, man, I feel actually amazing. So yeah, so don't get me wrong, still had some wobbles, but you'll know from speaking to several people is that I think once you've got that acceptance that you have to live with this now, then that reduces it
does.
immeasurably.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the coping strategies, but at least I know what's happening.
I think the world of work has changed. I mean, it will be different for you now because you're largely going to be freelancing and, you know, doing what you do, thankfully. I still am like under an employer. I think, you know, back in those early days, that time at the telecommunication company was the first time I ever tried to address anything in my mental health. And even in just the sort of 10 years since, I think business has got a much more sort of solid grasp of things like well-being, you know what I mean? So as much as the people in that particular company weren't always necessarily equipped to deal with it, like I don't think there was really an understanding in any industry at the time. It was this new idea that, oh, you know, people need to, you know, address their mental health. And like, I think companies nowadays are much less punitive than was previously the case, which I think is progress, you know what I mean? But
it's been progress for like profit's sake, though.
Yeah.
You know, they found out that it was costing them billions of pounds a year, and they decided to try and address it, and they try and address it in ways like, you know, like sit down like sort of guidance counsellors and like sort of call centres and that type of stuff, and it feels kind of hollow to me in some respects. But I think like one of the big things that I'm really enthusiastic and passionate about is like being able to do therapy for people for like not a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to use this podcast studio to supplement that for people in low income. But I don't think that we truly have an understanding of just quite how like income and security really impacts people. Like you're just saying there, like how that, if you can start with sort of low level poor mental health, but a bad work environment, and then the insecurity of income, and then poor experiences, you can just spiral into like the worst types of like mental health experiences, and that cause in the workplace, you know.
Aye,
And
that's
it
almost exclusively what I'm on.
It upsets me so much that again it's that privilege, is that you get so many people, I speak to so many people who are middle class, or they've got a bit of money, they've managed to pay for their therapy. But then when you go down and you've got people with low income, they don't, first of all, they have no fucking idea what it is that they're going through. And then it's like you put on that, and that's one of the things from talking to people on a Sonic Hug as well, is you tell someone that you're going to kill yourself, and then they're like, right, well, we need to put you on a waiting list. You're on that waiting list for 9 months. And then it's like, but, and they're asking you, do you think you're actually going to kill yourself? Well, you have to fill out a form and say, there's been so many times that I've felt suicidal, and I've been in either a doctor's surgery or whatever, and that form's been given to me.
The questionnaire.
Yeah. And I'm like, I'd be mortified. I can't sit here and tell these people that I'm going to kill myself. So
yeah,
it's such a harrowing experience. And one of the other things that I'm getting for people now is that they'll be like, the therapy that I actually got after that 6-month, 8-month wait was so ineffective.
Totally.
Because the person, and as much as, you know, I try and be as compassionate as possible to everybody, and, you know, and try and sort of go that level deeper to try and understand people's motives. As a therapist, you kind of need to do that, you know. You can't just be judging people, otherwise you'll never really connect with anybody. But the guys that are these, they must have studied for so long for them to get 45 minutes with somebody. And I do 2-hour sessions with people, because the guy that's mentoring me is like, you can't do it in an hour.
No.
It's impossible. You need to extend that out to really get a grasp of what people are going through and try and get them to come up with the solutions for themselves. So I feel bad for the people that are in that system having to sit with people in front of them going, I'm going through this horrible time, there's nothing they can do about it, because they're restricted by the system itself. You know?
It's something that's quite, and in terms of
horrible.
the sort of podcasting side of things, like mental health is something that has become like a really big sort of topic. And as I say, you've got a great experience in the sort of sector or industry, or whatever you want to call it. Like, why was it important that A Sonic Hug was also another podcast that addressed sort of mental health?
So it was always my aim, and it took me, so I recorded my episode 49 times, and it was horrendous, and I cried every single time I had to record. And I sent it back to the network to listen, and they were like, "Oh my God, this is so powerful." And I was like, "Yeah," but it was always the aim that I wasn't going to sugarcoat stuff. And I was just like, I'm fed up of this. I'm fed up of listening to these podcasts or, ITV, because what you're saying there about the whole, the hollowness of bringing this mental health stuff into companies, it's that same hollowness when you watch programs like This Morning or Good Morning Britain, and they're like, oh, it's Mental Health Week, or it's Mental Health Week on ITV, but they continue to sugarcoat all the crap that's happening. Whereas I wanted just to say to someone, tell me everything that you are feeling, just do it, and let's just say it. And that was it, and that's been the thing. And I think that's been the biggest response from people is like, thank fuck I'm not the only person that's thinking this, or and there was one episode with Kirsten. She does Marbles Mag, and my God, she was talking about how she was feeling suicidal from the age of 7, and I was just, you listen to these things and you're just like, more people need to hear this.
Yeah.
That's basically what it was. It was just to
kind of similar to why we ended up starting.
That's a very similar thing to how we. I mean, we're very lucky in the sense that we've kind of went on similar journeys at a similar time, having a background with each other, and a pre-existing relationship, and the honesty that I have when we talk is something that I have subsequently, after being part of this, have taken into my everyday life and have those conversations. I had one very recently in the last few days with my parents where, I'm off the now and, we've covered in previous episodes and stuff like that, and my mum and dad have got to a stage where they can now ask me questions about it because they know that I'll actually respond. But one of them was, how long has this been the case? And I recounted a story with them where, and again, just as you say, just matter of fact, like that, the first time I basically put a pillow on my face and tried to suffocate myself, I was like 11. And I'm so used to that conversation now that I forget how impactful it is for other people, because I went home and an hour later my dad was on the phone and was actually I'm so sorry, I just naturally slipped into my routine of just being honest, and he was like, no, I'm phoning you to thank you. And I was just like, what? And he's like, what? Telling it like it is something that has let me understand more. And my dad's 75 now, you know what I mean? And he's now having conversations like, I was depressed and I remember this, and I think maybe feels a bit guilty and stuff like that. And I'm like, it's not about guilt, it's just the way it is, you know what I mean? Sort of thing. So I think the conversation is amazing, but I often forget how impactful they are, and I'm no surprised that you're saying that the feedback you've had for other people is that people are like, wow, it's unbelievable to hear somebody talk in these kind of terms.
I've got a question off of the back of that. And I hate this, right? The whole, we didn't have that. We didn't have anxiety and mental health. I remember my mum being like, my nerves are shot. And as an adult now, I'm like, oh, my mum suffered from anxiety, clearly, just the language was different.
Aye.
So why are the older generations sort of pushing back towards
I get depression? I know you did, but my dad used to call it, I was scunnered. I'm taking a few days off, I'm scunnered. And I can now look back on it and go, that was my dad's fight.
So
you know what I mean?
Why are we seeing the sort of, for lack of a better term, the boomers, but they are pushing back and they're going we didn't have this, you need to just pull your socks up, that type of sort of nonsense. But why are they not going, it's just a different language that you're using, but we went through the same stuff?
Yeah. So I think the internet's got a big part to play, and the communication between everyone is massive. I think things are softer now. People are more empathetic. Don't get me wrong. My mum still, she was a nurse, right? And, I say something like, I've cut myself. She's like, unless you're bleeding down that floor, then I'm not actually, you're fine. And it's like, right, okay. But see now, totally different. She'll really pick up on stuff. And that's because she suffered from PTSD over the pandemic. She was on one of the last flights back from Australia.
Wow.
And it was utterly horrendous. I was tracking the flight for 24 hours, and it's the first time in my life that I've thought, oh my God, I'm actually going to like have a heart attack. She needs to just get back.
Yeah.
But in terms of a wider audience, I just don't know. Like it's that whole thing. I think it's diluting itself a bit more. But I think it's a class thing as well. And I think it's a regional thing. I think that very much white working classes, you know, just get on with it. But then I've spoken to a lot of people. We were Word Up, which is another podcast which I produced. And we did a mental health special. And this is the BBC Sounds. BBC Sounds, yeah.
Yep.
And the two of the hosts were saying that from an African... So in Africa, and I know this from North Africa as well, but East and West Africa, and they were like, you just hide it. You do not want to show that shame. You do not want to show that weakness.
Yeah.
And it's about that. It's about weakness. It's about pride. And it's like, oh, come on. You know, let's just...
It's funny when we frame it in those terms, or anybody frames it in those terms, because when we hear the types of conversations that we've had and that you're having with your guests, like, all I hear is strength. Like, and that's one of the things that nowadays I focus on when I'm at my worst, is that I've done this before. I've been on the road. Like, I've come out before, I'll come out again. And when I hear other people share their experiences, like, I hear strength, I don't hear weakness.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think I said that many a time. Like, there's more strength in a man that's willing to put his hands up and go, I'm suffering here, can I get some help?
Yeah.
Than what I did, which was for the first 25 years of my life, was puff my chest out and try and make it seem as if I was the biggest guy in the room.
Yeah.
I did the opposite of what I should have been doing. Should have been asking for help and talking to like my friends, people that are closest to me, and instead I just thought, no, I'll be the big man, like that sort of thing. And I agree. I think that there's an element to it that's class, and I think, like, when I think about my parents, I've got memories of like them feeding me and my sister like frozen pizzas for farm foods and not eating. So I'm like, how did you not have a mental health issue?
Yeah.
So they definitely did. Like, but then you do see quite a lot of the sort of middle class that will be like, we never had any of this. It's like, well, you didn't have all of these things going on.
The additional pressures
The
that come along with it.
They were terrible at times, you know, and the mental health that went on. I mean, like my parents, my dad used to go to the pub every day. Yeah. So my dad had to have like 3 or 4 pints of lager every day just to get by. Yeah. And it's like, oh, we didn't have that in our day. And it's like, yeah, but sorry, I don't want to be an alcoholic. And I want to try and get myself to a point where I can thrive, you know, but now they just want to shit all over it. You were talking earlier, we were talking there about sort of like financial insecurity. And very recently I've became a freelancer, and I'd seen that you'd put like a sort of call out on Twitter about like wanting to speak to people about their experiences with freelance. And I think that there is a sort of online thing about, like, you know, go out there, do it for yourself, and you go and make that money, and the side hustle, and you know, like, what are your experiences? Like, what are the things that you've experienced that have been sort of positive and negative? Because in my mind, and I'm very much just there, I'm only a year in, there's a trade-off that's happened. I no longer worry about getting the sack, but now I worry about the money, and really hyper-focused on how much money I've got coming in, where's my next payment coming, because I don't have my salary. But is that a similar sort of thing for you?
Yeah, so I think even as a woman, there's an added aspect to it that well, first, and I'm not saying that men don't suffer from imposter syndrome, but I'm so used to being battered for years, like down in terms of confidence by men that have worked above me or have worked in tech fields, especially in sound, and going, oh, do you need help? Oh, I think you could do that better. And then you start to totally doubt your ability. And then now I do stuff and I'm like, yeah, I'm actually doing it better than you, so I don't.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's also, so positives, I get to meet obviously some amazing people, and I get to, you know, you build some fantastic relationships, and you never know where that one is going to, like, they can get back in contact with you in a year and give you something massive. And yeah, so I guess that's been a positive, you know, not having a regimented week, you know. I mean, even though I'm a big fan of structure, the negatives.
And that's something that I've struggled with. I struggle big time with that. Like,
I don't
don't
think
know.
I could trust myself freelance. I think I'd spend like at least 65% of my time in my pajamas playing Football Manager.
Well, you think that.
You think you
the
would.
anxiety kicks
Yeah.
in and you're like, I'm going to go and find something
Yeah.
to do today. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I struggle with my days off now. Whereas
Yeah.
when I worked Monday to Friday 9 to 5, let's just say my days off were dedicated to me and I deserve this. But see now, I'm looking at my days off and going, shit, man, I need to get something booked in here.
Yeah.
Like, get me, which is another sort of anxiety that just creeps in you don't expect.
I feel guilty when I take time off, which is it's horrendous, and it makes my husband, I think, quite upset because I think he sees how much I do work, but it's that whole thing of you don't want to say no to anything, and I mean even the shitty stuff, you're like, no, I better say yeah. It's knowing what your self-worth is. So see when someone says, I'm going to pay you this, and you're like, that's a bit low, but then you're like, okay, well maybe that is what I'm worth. And then you meet someone and they go, no, you need to be charging quadruple that. And then you're just like, right, okay. So I've only learned that in the last 2 years. And that's thanks to strong people who, like the Big Light, they've kind of almost shown me what it is that, is
just how
there
tradable a commodity your talent is.
Exactly. And then I guess the other negatives, my God, it's still that imposter syndrome. I don't think I'll ever get rid of that. And I'm always doubting myself every single job that I go into. And I go, have I done a good enough job? Am I doing this right? Is this what they're going to want? What if they turn around at the end and they say, this is shit, you're going to have to do it all over again, or we're not using you again. So yeah, it's exhausting.
I mean, seeing that, obviously, like my therapist mind went on there, and I was like, that makes you good, Like it's like, see if you took that away, maybe what you're doing might be shit, Like you've clearly you want your work to be great, which is an amazing quality, and obviously you've got some high standards for yourself. And as a woman in the audio industry, I don't know if people really understand that. Even if being in bands, and I've been in many a recording studio, I don't think I've seen one woman in a recording studio, and I don't think I'm like exaggerating.
I think I've been in one recording
So
studio
I
in my
think
life,
that
and you look at me there, and I don't know the one.
All of the feelings that
throw
you're
you on
feeling,
that one,
or like your motivations and stuff like that, but then they tend to then get a wee bit too much, and get a wee bit overwhelming, and even I feel that, and I think
they see some of the shit that like female like journalists and writers, it's a fairly regular occurrence on their feed, with guys like Eve and all the rest of it, where they're regularly posting some of the just nonsense they get sent because people think that they can talk down to extremely high quality journalists and so on and so forth, again in that sort of freelancing sphere. But I think that's
being honest as well, just
if
I don't necessarily think it has much value, but I was really like, I need to make this podcast good because this is a big guest, so you get a good reputation, and within that the community, like definitely people are looking up to you. So if you've got that sort of imposter,
there's a lot of people that don't like me as well, though. So
I will fuck them. Like, who cares? Who cares what they think?
Yeah. So I
savour their tears and you're successful. That's what I do. Like.
But no, definitely, as much as like I said, I don't know how much that, but that is definitely like you've definitely got a good reputation, and everything that you said there about the imposter syndrome just makes you better at what you're doing. So
how is it for the early days podcast on the way through? How has the Big Light changed what you're doing, like kind of how you approach? Because it sounds as though, for what you're saying there, working as part of that network has had a fairly significant impact on how you approach your work.
Yeah, massive. Like Jennifer South is obviously broadcaster, she's a journalist, and Fiona White, she's come from telly, so she's done production, and the two of them combined, like in terms of having, for me in particular, having two strong women to kind of almost guide you, that and just, I guess, even from a professional standpoint, is introducing you. So when I do podcasts, or when I was doing them, I'd just be like putting in this shitty running order together and just be like, right, okay, this is just what we're doing. And, everything was just not really, it was off the cuff. And like, I am organized, but not to the point. So then when I started doing Word Up, I was like, oh my God, this is utterly incredible. And I learned so much. And, just from the research side as well, I was very fortunate enough to work with, and I still do work with her, as a woman called Arisa Qureshi, who's a phenomenal journalist. And so the two of us worked together, and I think the two of us learned a lot. And I guess that it was just that professionalism. It was the trusting us with this, because I think it was the first contract of that kind that the network had got in terms of from the BBC. But it was, at the same time, the pressure on you, it was just, but you never felt that you couldn't go to them and say, I don't know if we're going in the right direction with this, and it was the feedback and the mentoring almost that was happening at the same time. And honestly, like, I learned more in those 3 months than I have done in 12 years. So
that's amazing.
What's the biggest lessons that you've got for working with them?
Oh my God, biggest lessons. I guess don't doubt your own ability is a massive one. Just be very bold. And I guess is to, it was just more about some of the production techniques and things in terms of producing, and remembering that a podcast, because when I've done podcasts, and a podcast is very different from radio. It's very much off the cuff, and that's what makes it so enjoyable. It's not with a radio schedule. It's tight. There's certain segments and all that kind of shit. But with the podcast, it was them kind of almost bringing that love of podcasting back and saying, and suggesting certain production aspects and all this kind of stuff. And then, I mean, don't get me wrong, it took me about 3 episodes to get into my stride, but and to the first 3 episodes must have been about 12 hours each to edit just the narration audio between the two hosts, because I was so paranoid. And then by the 4th one, it was like, oh, it's an hour and a half. I've done it. So, and it's that confidence. So my confidence is built more. So that's the biggest thing is confidence. I guess.
Yeah.
And Word Up is you're more behind the scenes in production in this.
So I'm producer and editor.
Yeah.
And then Arisa's, she is researcher. We've got our 2 hosts, Vanessa and Etienne. Vanessa's massive on YouTube, and Etienne, he's done like Scotland's first black superhero comic. Yeah, so he's incredible.
So Beats of War.
Yeah, Beats of War, exactly.
No.
And then Janice, he was
in my
kind
screenshots. One of the ones I was keeping an eye on, and then I think he popped up on Sean, and we're like, okay.
Yeah, no, he's the loveliest man. And then Janice was kind of over it. She was an exec producer. But yeah, it's one of the studio that Fiona and Brian, who have the studio, it's one of the sweetest studio spaces I've ever seen in my life. And I was just going home to my... I'm so sorry.
No, it's all right. Don't worry about it. We're in the bare bones of a shop.
But I mean, this is like, it was like walking into fucking Abbey Road, and I was just like, I would honestly...
Is that the one that Sean uses for Blethered sometimes? I've seen on his Instagram, and it looks like Made of Veil or something.
Insane,
it looks beautiful, big high ceilings.
Yeah. And I would go home to my husband going, yeah, that's the dream. We've got it now. That's the bucket list, the goal. So, yeah.
I think that's really important, I think, for some people, like, to hear that there is a team behind a podcast. Like, some of going back sort of to the American podcast, you're looking at some of these guys, I mean, like Tom Segura's podcast, they've got like 30 people that work in that thing. They've got a guy that's there exclusively to go through TikTok and pull funny videos for them. So you're like, in one hand, you're looking at this sort of final product. Find a comedian that likes you, mate. You're looking at this final product, and you're thinking, these guys are really funny, and look, how do they find the time in the week to pull all this content together? Yeah. They're doing like 4 or 5 different podcasts. It turns out they've got a full production behind them. They're just the sort of face of it. So I think sometimes, like, people maybe doubt themselves, maybe like produce their own podcast and go, why is mine's not on the same level as something like this? It's like, because guys, come on, like,
I think that's why I like talking to other podcasters, because one thing I learned very quickly as we
Apart from the
started
mic
this.
placement, they know the mic placement. You don't get people that are sitting and they're like, "I saw you, like, mate, go and pull the mic in, please. Like, come on, at least you know how to put the mic."
What was I going to say?
Sorry,
I like talking to other podcasters. No, I've completely lost the chain of thought there. It's because we get to see. Right, so I just snip this.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things I like talking to other podcasters because we get that insight into how other people work. So like that notion that there is a team of people behind it. Like I remember we went to we did drunk therapy and they were in the Capital FM building, and I had it in my head that the way we did podcasts was just the way people did podcasts. When you walked in and there was an actual recording studio, and as you say, guys who were, you know, production assistants or whatever it is, it was a bit like, oh, hold on. And then as we go and talk to other podcasters, like, no, there's no standard sort of way to do it. Like, but again, the further down the line and the more we get involved in, you know, other things coming into play, it definitely helps. You know what I mean? Like to have that team, that support, and not just me and you, like bouncing shit off each other, like in, you know, WhatsApp groups or whatever it is. So it's definitely a benefit to have that like unit around you.
Yeah.
I was listening to a Sonic Hug actually, like in the build up. Obviously, I think Jabemi's episode. I was a friend of Jabemi's before his episode, and I think that was, I was like, I'm going to give this a listen because not only do I know the guy, but I've heard of this podcast as well. And one of the episodes, I can't remember who it was because I listen to podcasts in double time.
Yeah.
So like,
I just don't get it.
Nobody I meet is like, how do you do that? I'm like, because I want to get through them. So like, my ears have become accustomed. It's hard at first, right? But as you listen to it more, double the speed. And when you edit, I edit my podcast in double time as well. So it's just, I don't know, my ears have just become accustomed to it, right? So, but one of the guests was saying that we don't know how to communicate, and we don't know, like, we don't have the language yet quite sorted for how we feel and how to express that. And I was interested for speaking to all these people, what do you think is going to be the sort of best strategy for us to develop that? Do you think it's going to be school-led, or do you think it needs to be kind of like the home that really sort of develops that?
So school for me, like education, is like key, I guess. And I think, but I know that they are starting to bring it into school now, and they're having more mental health lessons, and those conversations are happening. And I think that that's the problem, is that when it's about normalizing that from a young age, so that when they're getting to teenagers, because if I'd have gone to secondary school and I know some of the people would just have been like, I'm not talking about this shit, you know, I'm just, and blah, blah, blah. But I also think that the government are a shit show, and which is it's a given. They're an easy target because they are so horrendous at addressing this issue. The mental health services are so criminally underfunded, but I feel so sorry for those services as well, because obviously the pandemic has probably just I know it has. It's created even like we're literally at crisis point now, and.
Yes.
I think there's no just one key thing. I think if anything, obviously education in school, but I want people to have access to therapy. That's just what I want, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
And for me, no offense, CBT didn't work for me. I've tried hypnotherapy. I've tried everything, but it was long-term talking therapy for me. But I think that's the other thing is giving people the opportunity to find the therapy that is suitable for them.
Yeah.
Making them not feel ashamed that, well, if you want that therapy, you're going to have to wait another 6 months, or if you want to go down this route and blah, blah, blah. They have to be able to find what's suitable for them. So that's one thing I've learned on that podcast as well. But I think it's just normalizing the conversation, which, is a constant. But, and then just, I'm so sick to death of all these frilly fucking things on social media as well. Like, let's have a glass of water or let's step out and look at the trees. And it's like, mate, no, I'm thinking about killing myself.
Yes.
What are you going to do about
It's quite
it?
ironic that one of the videos we recorded during the week was we kind of addressed the walking side of things, because that's something that, you know, in these conversations with my parents, for example, my dad would always go, if you tried going for a walk? And you're like, Dad, I'm nearly 40. I've been depressed for the large part of the last 25 years. If a walk was going to do it, it would have done it already. You know what I mean? And it's not to say that I don't benefit from getting out, getting a bit of exercise, getting air every once in a while, but I don't weaponise that in the way that you described for you. So again, it is just a totally personal thing, but I found that one quite, we were very much getting it, well, it's about you, it's about your approach, it's about what works for you.
Yeah.
And there, your point immediately just contradicts my complete lack of engagement with the walking side of things, you know what I mean? Like, unless I really need to go and let off some steam and just get out the house, aye, fair enough. But it's no, oh shit, I'm feeling bad today, I'm going to go for a walk.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
And don't get me wrong, there's days that I'm like, fuck the walking.
Yeah.
I need to tank something. I need to tank 2 bottles of wine because I cannot get through this day or think that that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
Or I just want to run away. Like, I haven't said this, but I had suicidal feelings as close as last year, and the police had to come to my house. And that's the first time that that's happened. And I was just like, why the fuck are the police here? And it was like, sorry, but we have to check that you're okay. And I was just like, oh my God. And then it's just this additional shame, because you're like, oh man, now the police are here and I don't think I can kill myself now. So it's like,
I can't even imagine.
I think the shame is the sort of critical bit when somebody's in that. It's people don't realise that it's not just the mental health issue that causes people a lot of sort of distress. It's the feelings that they have related to that, like I'm a burden or
totally.
These are the big things. It's all about relation to yourself. And going back to what you said about CBT, I meet people all the time that are like, CBT would never work for me, and I genuinely think the critical part of therapy is the therapist.
Yeah.
You need to have it doesn't matter what they're doing. If you can't speak to that person openly and honestly and feel a connection, no matter what style it is, it's pointless. Yeah. It's completely and utterly pointless. It's about... I
suppose it shares a thing with podcasting in that respect as well, doesn't it? Because, these conversations can only happen, I think, when you feel, in a safe place with somebody that you can trust who's also, got all that level of empathy, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's exactly it. It's like, it's the fact that us three can sit and talk to each other and go, I know, I've felt like that. And it's talking in a way that you can relate to, is as opposed to someone saying, well, like you say, have you thought about going for a walk? Or
I think even worse than that, it's the whole, like your consciousness and the subconsciousness, and do you really know how these things interact with each other? And it's like, come on, like as much as I'm as guilty as anybody to indulge in that, and meditation is like the vital part of my mental health practice. That's like the bullseye for me. Like, I don't ever speak to people that come in for sessions and tell them about their subconscious and the conscious mind until they're like 8 sessions in, and I'm like, they don't think I'm going to be an arsehole by talking to them about these all sort of
abstract ideas.
Yeah. It's about talking to each other in a way that we can relate and really. And the guy that mentors me is a guy called Dr. David Burns, and he's the head of psychiatry at Stanford University, and he's one of the pioneers of cognitive behavioural therapy. He says that his favourite thing that he does is his hike on the Sunday.
Yeah.
And he gets everybody that's doing his therapy comes and does this hike, and he doesn't speak at all. Says that he talks about his family, but they all start to speak to each other, and he's like, it's the community that then, and that brings everybody together, and they start to feed off each other and give each other advice, and he's like, it's beautiful. So
and
I think that's what people get,
A Sonic Hug. I've had people who've done the podcast and they've reached out to each other. So people who've experienced grief, for example, will feel some of the same things and so on. And yet that's been really beautiful as well.
Imagine, I just literally get like a shiver and I thought, imagine starting a podcast that ends with people being able to get grief support. That's amazing.
Aye,
You must be
definitely.
so proud of that, you know.
Do you know, someone said that to me. I'm very, like, I'm so down on myself and I hate praise or anything, but honestly, it's the best thing I've ever done and I'm so proud of it. Like, definitely. It's been hard work, and don't get me wrong, I had to take a bit of a time off before this next series. Because you take on other people's
This is definitely something
stuff.
that-
So yeah.
When you're talking about issues, there are times, especially if you're not at 100% yourself,
Yeah.
where it's hard not to take on some of what people are bringing to the table. You know what I mean? Like, we obviously spoke grief at a very, a more sort of sanitised, you know, where a charity come in and talk about the services they offered and stuff like that. But it was really just to highlight that in the pandemic, this support was available to people. But at the same time, that's not something that I think I could have got any deeper into with a guest at the time. You know what I mean? Like, I think we got to the, you know, just below the surface level, and I think if we went any deeper, that would have been something that I would have carried away with myself. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Like, they had issues when we talk to people about addiction. Like, that's something that's with me for days afterwards. You know, sometimes the days in the build up to it as well, because it's such a sensitive issue. You know what I mean? Like, but it's definitely difficult not to, like, when you're here empathising with somebody, not to take some of that on.
I think you'd be a sociopath if you didn't.
Oh.
You know, how could you sit and listen to somebody tell you they're breaking their heart about their mental health and just be like, that was great, thanks very much, now talk to you later, bye-bye. Jump into editing and being like, that was fantastic, I'm loving what I'm doing. But I mean, I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been such a nice to actually, like, sit down and talk to you. But just before we go, like, what have you got coming up next? I mean, sounds like season 3 of Sonic Hugs on the horizon.
Yeah, so I've been recording that. I'm producing a podcast series for Fringe of Colour, it's a festival for people, predominantly Black people. So that's been incredible. Like, very honoured to do that. And then I've been offered a few more things that I can't talk about, unfortunately. But I'm just at the moment I'm just going, am I good enough to do this? It's that continuation.
Be a middle-aged white guy, just say yes. Just like channel me and Paul and just be like, am I good enough for this? That is a thought that has literally never crossed my mind. Like, I just fuck it and do it. Let's see what happens. Like,
so that will be my new mantra. Just working, doing communications for We Are Here Scotland. There's so much.
So much going on.
Yeah, but thanks. This has been great.
No, not at all. It's been a pleasure to sit
in.
down, and it's been so nice to talk to somebody that's like so many common.
We like a podcasters union episode anyway, didn't we?
Yeah.
We've got a bingo card full of the ones in Glasgow, and we're just gradually just chalking them off one at a time. But we're looking to get in for a while, so it's been great to speak to you.
Amazing.
Thank you very much.
Thank
You can
you.